power is a fragile illusion, especially when wrapped in a badge and fueled by unchecked prejudice. A veteran police officer thought he was making a routine aggressive bust on a car thief. He never realized the woman he threw in handcuffs was the presiding judge holding his career's fate tomorrow. The dashboard clock of the 2024 Mercedes-Benz S-Class read 11:42 p.m. Honorable Valerie Hatcher gripped the leather steering wheel, her knuckles slightly tense, exhaling a long, exhausted breath. It had been a grueling 72-hour week presiding over the labyrinthine legal battles of the county's Supreme Criminal Court. At 52, Valerie had spent 3 decades clawing her way up the judicial ladder. She was a woman of impeccable standing, a formidable legal mind, and one of the few black women to hold a senior judgeship in a district notoriously steeped in old money politics. Rain slicked the asphalt of Route 114, transforming the suburban roads into dark, reflective ribbons. Valerie was just 3 miles from her home in the affluent gated community of Oak Ridge Estates. The Mercedes was a recent anniversary gift from her husband Frankie, a successful orthopedic surgeon. She had barely driven it enough to memorize the dashboard controls. As she navigated a sweeping curve, the interior cabin was silent, save for the soft hum of the engine and the rhythmic slap of the windshield wipers. A mile behind her, Officer Bradley Jenkins sat in his idling cruiser, nursing a tepid coffee and a simmering resentment for the night shift. Bradley was a 12-year veteran of the force, a man whose career had stagnated due to a documented history of insubordination and excessive force complaints. He was built like a cinder block with a tight buzz cut and a perpetual sneer that he mistook for authority. He prided himself on his instincts, a thinly veiled justification for the racial profiling that frequently colored his patrols. When the sleek black Mercedes cruised past his hidden vantage point, Bradley's eyes narrowed. It was a high-end vehicle, the kind that rarely traversed this specific stretch of county road this late at night, unless it belonged to an Oak Ridge resident. But as the car passed under a street lamp, Bradley caught a fleeting glimpse of the driver's silhouette, a black woman. Bradley set his coffee down, his heart rate ticking upward with a predatory thrill. He pulled out, accelerating quickly until the cruiser's headlights flooded the rear of the Mercedes. He punched the license plate into his onboard computer. Loading. Due to a clerical lag at the Department of Motor Vehicles, the newly transferred vanity plates had not yet fully populated in the local precinct's secondary database. The screen flashed a bright, glaring amber warning. Registration mismatch. Potential stolen vehicle. That was all Bradley needed. He didn't bother running a secondary check through the state database, which would have cleared the error in 10 seconds. He slapped the sirens. Red and blue lights violently fractured the darkness inside Valerie's car. Valerie's eyes darted to the rearview mirror. A heavy, familiar, sinking feeling settled in her stomach. Despite her titles, her education, and her gavel, she knew exactly what it meant to be a black woman pulled over on a dark, isolated road. She immediately decelerated, signaling properly, and pulled onto the wide gravel shoulder, parking the car beneath the dim glow of a solitary street lamp. She shifted into park, turned off the engine and rolled down all 4 windows, a habit she had drilled into her own children. She turned on the interior dome light, placed her keys on the dashboard, and rested both hands flat on the steering wheel, right at 10 and 2. In the rearview mirror, she watched Bradley step out of his cruiser. He did not approach casually. He approached with his hand resting heavily on the unclasped holster of his service weapon. His flashlight beam sliced through the rain, deliberately blinding her as it hit the side mirror and bounced into her eyes. License, registration, and step out of the vehicle. Bradley barked, stopping just behind the driver's side door, maintaining a tactical disadvantage for the driver. Valerie blinked against the harsh glare. "Good evening, officer. My license and registration are in my purse, which is on the passenger seat. May I reach for them?" Her voice was steady, resonant, and carried the unmistakable cadence of a woman accustomed to commanding a courtroom. Bradley stepped closer, leaning in the smell of cheap coffee and stale rain rolling off his uniform. I said, "Step out of the vehicle. Now." "Officer," Valerie said, her tone lowering into a calm, authoritative register, "I am perfectly willing to comply, but standard procedure dictates I provide my identification first. The vehicle is registered to my husband, Frankie Hatcher. If you check the full state database—" "Did I ask for a lecture?" Bradley snapped his voice, rising the flashlight beam, now directed squarely into her face. "You're driving a flagged vehicle, lady. Open the door and step out, or I will remove you from the vehicle." Valerie's jaw tightened. The disrespect was palpable, thick in the humid air. She knew the law intimately. She literally instructed juries on it. She also knew that arguing the law on a dark road with an agitated armed officer was a death sentence. "I am stepping out of the vehicle," Valerie announced slowly. She reached with her left hand, pulled the door handle and pushed it open. She stepped out into the rain wearing a tailored charcoal wool coat over her courtroom blouse. Even standing on the wet gravel, she radiated an imposing dignity. Before she could fully balance herself, Bradley grabbed her left arm and violently spun her around, slamming her chest and face against the wet roof of the Mercedes. Valerie gasped, the cold metal shocking her system. "Officer, what are you doing? You are using excessive force." "Shut up!" Bradley yelled. He kicked her feet apart, a standard but unnecessarily rough tactic, and wrenched her arms behind her back. The steel handcuffs bit brutally into her wrists. The clicks echoed sharply in the quiet night. "You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. You are making a colossal mistake," Valerie said, her cheek pressed against the rain-slicked roof of her car. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. The cold logic of a judge analyzing a flawed prosecution took over her mind. "If you look in my purse, you will find my state judicial identification. My name is Valerie Hatcher," Bradley scoffed loudly, patting her down with zero regard for her personal space before violently yanking her upright by the chain of the cuffs. "Yeah, right. And I'm the chief of police. You people always have a story. It's a stolen car. You fit the profile. You're going downtown." He shoved her toward the cruiser. Valerie stumbled, but caught her footing, her posture instantly straightening. She looked Bradley dead in the eyes. She didn't see a protector. She saw a bully drunk on a minuscule fraction of power. "I will not resist you, officer," Valerie said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly quiet whisper. "But I promise you, you will remember this night for the rest of your life." Bradley laughed, opening the back door of the cruiser. "Get in." He pushed her head down aggressively, forcing her into the plastic-molded back seat of the police car, slamming the door shut and sealing her in the claustrophobic, caged darkness. The ride to the 4th Precinct was a masterclass in psychological endurance. Valerie sat in the back of the cruiser, the tight handcuffs cutting off the circulation to her fingers. The rain drummed against the roof. Up front, Bradley was practically humming, tapping his fingers on the steering wheel, utterly convinced he had just scored a major felony arrest that would look fantastic on his quarterly review. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4, bringing in one female suspect, grand theft auto, the Mercedes on Route 114. "Copy that, Unit 4, the dispatcher crackled back. Valerie closed her eyes. She thought of her courtroom. She thought of the hundreds of young men and women of color who had stood before her, describing this exact brand of degradation. The instant assumption of guilt. The physical roughness meant to provoke a reaction. The utter lack of basic human decency. Experiencing it firsthand, despite her privilege and status, ignited a cold, calculated fury in her chest. She decided right then and there she was not going to tell anyone at the precinct who she was. Not yet. She wanted to see exactly how the system treated an anonymous black woman in the dead of night. The cruiser pulled into the sally port of the precinct. Bradley hauled her out of the back seat with the same unnecessary aggression, parading her through the double doors into the brightly lit, chaotic booking area. The precinct smelled of floor wax, stale sweat, and despair. Telephones rang incessantly. Officers milled about, sipping energy drinks and typing up reports. When Bradley walked in with Valerie, a few heads turned. Even in handcuffs soaking wet, Valerie possessed an aura of undeniable authority. Sergeant Mitchell Hayes was working the booking desk. He was a tired man, nearing retirement, peering over a pair of reading glasses. He looked at Bradley, then at Valerie. "What do we got, Jenkins?" Hayes asked, his voice rough from decades of yelling. "Grand Theft Auto," Bradley declared, proudly pushing Valerie toward the heavy metal desk. Caught her driving a stolen 24 S-Class out near Oak Ridge. Didn't want to cooperate. Kept spinning some yarn about being a judge. Bradley chuckled, looking around to see if any of his fellow officers were appreciating the joke. A few smirked. Hayes looked at Valerie. He noted her expensive coat, her pristine though wet hair, and the calm, piercing intensity of her gaze. "Name?" Hayes asked. "Valerie Hatcher," she replied evenly. "Address: 412 Willow Creek Drive, Oak Ridge Estates." Bradley snorted. "Yeah, she broke into a house, stole the keys, and now she thinks she lives there." "Officer Jenkins," Valerie said, turning her head slowly to look at him. "Has it occurred to you to simply run the license plate through the primary state registry instead of relying on the localized county cache?" Hayes paused, his fingers hovering over his keyboard. He looked at Valerie with a sudden fleeting glimmer of uncertainty. "Let me run it," Hayes muttered. Bradley slammed his hand on the desk. "Sarge, the county system flagged it. We have it on camera. Book her." "I said," Hayes growled, pulling rank, "I'm running it." Hayes typed the plate number into the state database. The precinct held its breath for 5 seconds. The machine beeped. The screen glowed green. "Registered owner, Frankie Hatcher. Status, clear, active. No warrants. No theft reports." Hayes stared at the screen. A heavy, uncomfortable silence descended over the booking desk. Hayes looked up at Bradley, his expression darkening. "Jenkins, the car is registered to a Frankie Hatcher, not stolen." Bradley's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. He immediately backpedaled, refusing to accept fault. "Well, how do we know she's allowed to drive it? She probably stole it from her boss. Or she's a maid out for a joyride. I still want her processed for resisting arrest and failure to comply." Valerie didn't flinch. "I am allowed my one phone call, Sergeant. I would like to make it now." Hayes, sensing a massive liability brewing, nodded quickly. "Take the cuffs off her, Jenkins." "But Sarge—" "Take the damn cuffs off, officer." Hayes barked, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. Gritting his teeth, Bradley unlocked the handcuffs. Valerie brought her arms forward, gently rubbing her bruised wrists. She did not rub them furiously. She maintained her absolute composure. She picked up the precinct phone and dialed her husband's number from memory. "Frankie," she said when he picked up her voice, betraying none of the trauma of the past hour. "I need you to come to the 4th precinct. Yes. Bring my state ID and my judicial badge from the safe. I'll explain when you get here." She hung up and turned back to Hayes. "I will wait on that bench until my husband arrives. I strongly suggest Officer Jenkins remains in the building. He and I have unfinished business." Bradley sneered, leaning against a pillar. "Lady, you got lucky the car wasn't reported stolen yet. You can drop the act. Tomorrow I'm writing up a comprehensive report on your resisting. You'll be back in the system." Valerie simply walked to the wooden bench, sat down and crossed her legs. She closed her eyes, gathering her strength. 45 minutes later, the double doors of the precinct flew open. Frankie Hatcher, a tall, imposing man in a tailored trench coat, strode into the room. He bypassed the patrol officers and walked straight to his wife. He knelt down, inspecting her wrists. The angry red welts were highly visible. Frankie's jaw clenched so hard, a muscle twitched in his cheek. He stood up, walking directly to the booking desk. He reached into his breast pocket and slammed a leather wallet onto the metal counter. It flipped open. Inside was Valerie's gold judicial badge and her state Supreme Court identification card. "I am Dr. Frankie Hatcher," he said, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. "And that woman on the bench is my wife, the Honorable Valerie Hatcher, presiding judge of the 9th District Criminal Court." Sergeant Hayes stopped breathing. The blood drained from his face. He looked at the ID, looked at the woman on the bench, and felt the floor drop out from under him. The entire precinct seemed to freeze in a terrifying tableau. "Judge Hatcher!" Hayes choked out. Bradley Jenkins, who had been filling out paperwork across the room, froze. His pen hovered over the page. He turned around slowly. Valerie stood up. She walked over to the desk, her heels clicking ominously on the linoleum. She picked up her badge, slipping it into her pocket. She looked at Sergeant Hayes, but her words were meant for the entire room. "Your officer," Valerie said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, "profiled me, assaulted me unlawfully, detained me, and ignored every procedural mandate in your handbook. He assumed I was a criminal because of the color of my skin and the car I was driving." She finally turned her gaze to Bradley. He was pale, his arrogant sneer completely wiped away, replaced by the hollow, wide-eyed look of a man who realized he had just stepped on a landmine. "You're a judge," Bradley whispered, his voice cracking. "I am," Valerie said softly, the danger in her tone absolute. "And Officer Jenkins, do you happen to know where you are scheduled to be at 9:00 a.m. tomorrow?" Bradley swallowed hard, a cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. "You are the primary arresting officer, giving testimony in the State versus Miller armed robbery case." Valerie continued, stepping inches away from him. "A high-profile case, and you will be giving that testimony in courtroom 302. She tilted her head, her eyes drilling into his soul. "My courtroom." Valerie turned her back on him, took her husband's arm and walked out of the precinct, into the rainy night, leaving behind a silence so profound it felt like a grave. Morning sunlight pierced the heavy oak blinds of courtroom 302, casting long geometric shadows across the polished mahogany benches. The room was a sanctuary of the law, a cavernous space designed to make every individual feel appropriately small in the face of justice. For the past 20 years, this had been Valerie Hatcher's domain. She ruled it with a blend of brilliant legal acumen and an ironclad demand for respect. Today, however, the air in the room felt different. It was thick, charged with an unspoken tension that only a few individuals understood. Across town, Officer Bradley Jenkins was standing in front of his bathroom mirror, staring at a face that looked 10 years older than it had the previous evening. His stomach was a roiling knot of acid and dread. He had not slept a single minute. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the blinding flash of his cruiser's lights, the rain-slicked roof of the Mercedes, and the chilling, composed face of the woman he had unlawfully shoved into the back of his police car. He had spent the entire night praying for a miracle. He hoped she would recuse herself. He hoped she would call in sick. He hoped his precinct captain would reassign him to desk duty before the sun came up, sparing him the humiliation of walking into a courtroom. None of those miracles materialized. He buttoned his uniform, his fingers trembling so badly he fumbled the brass clasps twice. The badge on his chest, which he usually wore like a shield of invincibility, now felt like a heavy, damning target. When Bradley arrived at the courthouse, the usual swagger that accompanied his stride was entirely absent. He walked through the metal detectors with his shoulders hunched, avoiding the gaze of the court deputies who already seemed to know what had transpired. Rumors traveled faster than light in the judicial system. As he pushed through the heavy double doors of courtroom 302, he felt the immediate crushing weight of the environment. The prosecutor, a sharp, ambitious lawyer named Cynthia Albright, waved him over to the prosecution table. "Jenkins, you look terrible," Albright whispered, organizing her case files. "You ready for this? The defense is going to come at you hard on the chain of custody for the weapon in the Miller case. You need to be sharp today." "I'm fine," Bradley lied, his voice sounding like dry gravel. He wiped a bead of cold sweat from his temple. He kept shooting nervous glances toward the heavy wooden door behind the judge's bench. The door remained closed. The clock on the wall ticked loudly each second, sounding like a hammer striking an anvil in his head. At precisely 9 o'clock, the side door finally opened. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed, echoing off the high-vaulted ceiling. "The Superior Court of the 9th District is now in session. The Honorable Judge Valerie Hatcher presiding. God save the state and this honorable court." Bradley stood up, his legs feeling like lead pipes. He gripped the edge of the wooden railing, separating the gallery from the well of the court. Valerie emerged from the chambers. The charcoal coat from last night was gone, replaced by the sweeping, voluminous black robes of her office. She moved with a fluid, terrifying grace, every step radiating absolute, unassailable authority. She ascended the steps to the bench, her expression entirely unreadable. She arranged her files, adjusted her microphone, and finally deliberately lifted her gaze. Her eyes swept across the courtroom, lingering for a fraction of a second on the defense table before moving to the prosecution. Finally, her eyes locked directly onto Bradley Jenkins. It was a look of pure, crystalline ice. The physical reaction Bradley experienced was instantaneous and violently overwhelming. All the blood rushed aggressively from his head, pooling in his boots. The walls of the enormous courtroom seemed to warp and tunnel inward. The buzzing of the fluorescent lights magnified, until it sounded like a swarm of hornets in his ears. His vision blurred white spots dancing at the edges of his sight. He swayed on his feet, his knees buckling under the sheer, crushing reality of his situation. He gasped for air, his chest tightening as a full-blown panic attack seized his nervous system. "Jenkins," Albright hissed, grabbing his elbow as he began to pitch backward. "What is wrong with you?" Bradley fell heavily into the wooden pew, his breathing ragged. He clutched his chest, nearly fainting as the room spun wildly. He had arrested this woman. He had violently slammed this brilliant, powerful magistrate against a car in the rain, and now she held the fate of his biggest case and potentially his entire career in the palm of her hand. I'm okay," he choked out, though his ghostly pale complexion screamed otherwise. "Be seated," Valerie commanded, her voice amplified through the sound system, smooth and resonant, showing absolutely no sign of the trauma she had endured less than 10 hours prior. "We are here on the matter of the state versus Miller. The prosecution may call its first witness." Albright stood up, oblivious to the history between the judge and her star witness. Your Honor, the state calls Officer Bradley Jenkins to the stand." Bradley felt his soul leave his body. He forced himself to stand, his legs shaking visibly. He walked toward the witness stand, the short journey feeling like a march across an endless desert. He raised his right hand, swore the oath, and sat down. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the prosecutor, utterly terrified to look to his left, where Valerie sat looking down at him from her elevated perch. The direct examination went horribly. Albright tried to guide Bradley through the events of the Miller robbery, but Bradley's mind was a shattered mirror. He stumbled over basic facts, mixed up dates, and contradicted his own preliminary reports. Every time he paused, the silence in the courtroom felt suffocating. Valerie sat perfectly still, taking meticulous notes, her face a mask of judicial neutrality. She did not need to scowl. Her mere presence was dismantling him piece by piece. Then came the cross-examination. The defense attorney, a shrewd veteran named Mr. Harrison, approached the podium. He had noticed Bradley's erratic, terrified behavior and smelled blood in the water. "Officer Jenkins," Harrison began, his tone deceptively conversational. "You stated earlier that you followed proper protocol when securing the evidence at the Miller scene. Are you absolutely certain about that?" "Yes." Bradley croaked, his throat completely parched. "Because your record indicates a pattern of, let us say, aggressive shortcuts," Harrison continued, pulling out a thick file. "In fact, you have 3 documented complaints for failing to properly verify vehicle registrations before initiating hostile stops. Is procedure something you value, Officer Jenkins, or just a suggestion when it suits your mood?" "Objection," Albright said, standing up. "Relevance, Your Honor." Valerie looked down at the prosecutor, then at Bradley. "Overruled," she said, her voice echoing with a quiet, lethal calm. "The officer's adherence to standard police protocol and his credibility regarding procedural integrity is highly relevant to this court. The witness will answer the question." Bradley felt a cold bead of sweat roll down his spine. He looked at Valerie. She stared back, her expression daring him to lie under oath about his respect for the law. I always try to follow procedure," Bradley stammered, looking down at his trembling hands. "Try." Harrison pounced. "You try. Let's talk about last night, officer. Where were you assigned to patrol last night?" Bradley's head snapped up. The prosecutor looked confused. Valerie did not move a muscle. "Objection," Albright yelled. "Your Honor, last night has absolutely nothing to do with this robbery case from 6 months ago." "Your Honor," Harrison countered smoothly. "I received an anonymous tip this morning from the 4th Precinct regarding an incident that occurred last night, which directly speaks to this officer's credibility bias and blatant disregard for the law. I believe it is crucial for establishing his character on the stand." Valerie folded her hands over her gavel. "I will allow it, Counselor. Proceed." Bradley felt his heart threaten to crack his ribs. He was trapped. "Officer Jenkins," Harrison asked, leaning in, "did you or did you not initiate an unlawful traffic stop last night based on a false system flag? And did you subsequently assault and arrest a citizen without verifying their identity, solely based on your personal prejudices?" "It was a mistake," Bradley whispered. The system flagged it." "A mistake," Harrison boomed. "Did you use excessive force? Did you ignore the citizen's request to present identification?" Bradley was hyperventilating now. The courtroom was dead silent. He looked at Valerie silently, begging for mercy, pleading for her to stop the line of questioning. She offered him none. She simply watched him drown in the consequences of his own arrogance. I didn't know who she was," Bradley confessed, his voice breaking, tears of humiliation welling in his eyes. Valerie finally spoke. Her voice cut through the air, sharp and unyielding. "Officer Jenkins, the law does not care who a person is. The law demands that every citizen is treated with the exact same dignity, rights, and procedural justice, whether they are a high school teacher, a janitor, or a judge. Your admission that your behavior would have been different had you known the identity of the driver is an admission of profound prejudice." She turned to the gallery. Sitting in the back row was Captain Miller of the 4th Precinct, along with 2 suits from Internal Affairs. Valerie had made a single phone call that morning. In light of the testimony provided today and the clear deterioration of the arresting officer's credibility, Valerie announced, her voice carrying the absolute weight of the law. I am entertaining a motion to dismiss the charges in the state versus Miller, pending a full internal review of the evidence handling. Albright looked devastated, but nodded. She knew her star witness was fatally compromised. Furthermore, Valerie continued, looking directly into Bradley's terrified eyes, this court will be forwarding a formal judicial complaint regarding Officer Jenkins's conduct, both past and present, to the District Attorney's Office and the Internal Affairs Bureau. Power without accountability is tyranny, Officer Jenkins. You abused your badge to strip citizens of their dignity. Today the system strips you of yours. She struck her gavel. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Court is adjourned. Bradley sat frozen on the witness stand, his career effectively incinerated in the span of 30 minutes. He watched as Valerie stood her black robes, billowing as she stepped down from the bench and walked back into her chambers, never once looking back at the shattered man she left behind. The deputies moved in to escort him out, his badge practically burning a hole through his uniform. He had thought he was the law. He had learned too late what the law actually looked like. The gavel falls, but the fight for true justice continues every single day. If Judge Hatcher's incredible story of holding corrupt authority accountable inspired you, please hit that like button and share this video with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell for more real-life stories of power, truth, and the ultimate triumph of justice. Thank you for watching and supporting us today.